So joining us today is John Howells from the New South Wales Lancers Memorial Museum. I hope I've got that right. John, the New South Wales Lancers are a really interesting institution in that they're a regiment of the Australian Army, a reserve regiment, and they're older than both the Australian Army by a significant margin and Australia itself, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the regiment before we get more into the museum?
Yes, the regiment was formed toward the end of 1884, actually gazetted in February 1885 as part of the New South Wales Military Forces, which basically means the New South Wales Army. They were initially called a light horse regiment. But light horse at that point were basically sword-mounted cavalry. They became Lancers after Richardson, the commander of the New South Wales Military Force, came back from the Sudan, where he'd been impressed by the showing of the British Lancer regiments with their pretty pennants of the Polish flag upside down. He converted the Sydney squadron of what was called the New South Wales Cavalry Reserves into Lancers. Initially, they paraded with fishing rods, but they obtained bamboo Lancers from India, and Lancers have been made from a number of things, and the traditional red and white pennants that were used by the British Army Lancer regiments, and are still used by the QRL, Queen's Royal Lancers, the remaining British regiment. They expanded basically from Berry in the south of New South Wales up to Lismore in the north. They trained more and more with Lancers. The Lancers expanded into those elements that were light horse. That was up until 1893. And in 1893, they sent a group across to compete in the tournaments in the UK. And interestingly enough, we've got in our museum, we've got a number of pieces of items of memorabilia from that point, including a tassel that was stolen from Queen Victoria's coach. It's a rather interesting story, along with all of the records of that contingent, including correspondence, a whole lot of it we've got in the museum. In 1897, in 1894, the regiment was renamed the New South Wales Lancers. And the uniforms had changed in time. Initially, they were wearing a blue uniform, following the lines of the British 5th Royal Irish Lancers, except that the badges and buttons were of silver rather than gold. And as far as the Armoured Corps can work out, that is why the whole of the Australian Armoured Corps wears silver badges, whereas if you go back to the Brit Armoured Corps, you'll find them wearing silver, gold, and a mixture. The uniform originally had a pith helmet, but that soon became the slouch hat. And initially, we were wearing a slouch hat, a red puggaree, and of course a black cock's plume, which if you go back into the history of the Australian units on formation in 1903, New South Wales units did not have the emu plume. They had the black cock's plume. And
can I ask when they started, when they finished up using carrying actual Lancers?
Sorry?
When did they actually finish carrying Lancers themselves, your bamboo Lancers?
The regiment still carries Lancers today.
There you go. And
as a matter of fact, I've had phone calls and emails with the regimental sergeant major over the last week or so, where we're sourcing every lance we can get and excuse me, getting new pennants made. Lances and lance pennants have a habit of disappearing out the back of the Q store, I'm afraid.
Are they still called guidons, or is that a different?
No, that's a totally different thing.
Oh, okay.
That's the equivalent of infantry colours, and it is it's quite a different thing to the. It's a sacred flag.
Okay.
And that, yes, is called a guidon, but a lance was the weapon, but the guidon is the ceremonial flag.
And so I take you still have a troop of horse-mounted troopers? No,
we don't. No, we don't. They were only ever volunteers who did it on their own time and at their own expense. The government has never been prepared to cover the cost of a horse-mounted unit or subunit. That's the horses are a very, very expensive thing to have and to maintain. But at various times, particularly when the regiment did its centenary in 1985, we had a horse troop of volunteers. The guys who carry the lances, they carry them dismounted or with the lance sticking up through the top of their current armoured vehicles. So that's where the Lancers go today, which is what the Brit Lancers do. So anyway, back to the history. They in 1899, a squadron was sent to the United Kingdom to train. They held a camp in 1898 around Rookwood, which is now an almost full cemetery, but at that point had a lot of space in it. And the gentlemen, of course, guffawed around their beers and said, "We've done as much as we can to train some cavalry in New South Wales. We'd better get a group together and send them off to the UK to train." And so a squadron, 75 men, was sent to Aldershot in the United Kingdom to train with British cavalry. And they trained under the six Dragoon Guards. The group were there finishing their training at the time that and each individual had to pay their own way over. They had to raise £20 each, and that's the equivalent in current days of a pound basically equals $1,000 if you do on a trooper's pay comparison. And so each man had to raise about £20,000 to go to the UK. One young digger who was obviously from a good family was found to have £100 in his kit bag when he was over there. They were finishing their training just as the Boer War was declared. The Boers attacked from the Orange Free State down into Kimberley and down the railway toward Colesberg, and they attacked from the across into Natal. And so the Boers did the initial war declaration attack. Our guys arrived as the first overseas troops into South Africa. Before they left for Britain, they'd cabled the New South Wales government saying, "Can we stay and fight?" And when they got to Cape Town, they were told that all those above the age of 21 could stay and fight, and most did. There were 29 who went back. They then fought in the South African War, as Lancers. And they were armed with the 2.8 metre lance with a Martini Enfield carbine and a sword. They were basically the first Australian troops in Australian uniform into battle at the Battle of Belmont in November 1899. They then fought at Arundel, which is just short of Colesberg, and that's where Tom Roberts was the first Australian soldier nominated for the VC. It was not awarded. A farmhand from Singleton was not, from our opinion, was not considered worthy of having a VC. Interestingly enough, that guy, Tom Roberts, went on to become a sergeant in the New South Wales Police Force. And his exploits as a policeman equated to the kind of thing that he did to get his VC nomination. And it was very similar to the action that Lieutenant House did the next a year or so later, 18 months later, to get his VC. They then fought with French's forces outflanking Kimberley, fought in the Battle of Paardeberg, up through until Bloemfontein, then up to Pretoria, across to, I know Ermelo was basically the end of where they got to, but they went across the top, fighting the Boers. They were withdrawn in December 1901 and 1900 and January 1901. The guys were basically withdrawn in December 1900 so that we could have some soldiers on parade in Sydney on the 1st of January with some overseas medals to be part of the formation of Australia. The regiment, like all Australian units, was converted to light horse in 1903 when the Australian Army had been formed in 1901, but they were actually created in 1903. And in 1903, they were converted to light horse. And of course, light horse being you're armed with a 303 Lee Enfield, mounted on a horse using a cavalry organisation, but the idea is to scout on your horse, but if you were to engage in combat, to dismount and fight on foot. They continued to train through until the 1914, and in 1914 we have an interesting point where it was decided not to send the existing units in Australia. And that is because they were covered by the Defence Act, which said that they fell under British command once they left Australia. And that there had been problems with that, not so much with the Lancers, but certainly if you really want to find out about that, read about the Wilmansrust incident with the 5th VMR, where an interesting situation took place with British officers over Australian troops. It was negotiated, the AIF was negotiated to the extent that they would be under Australian command up to formation level, and a special volunteer force would be formed. What happened with the regiment was that it went from 400 men, or 450 or so, down to about 30 in about a month. And that's the regiment that stayed in Australia in Parramatta. What happened to those other guys was they formed the 1st Light Horse AIF. And the 1st Light Horse AIF went off to fight. The and they got, and at the end of the war in 1918, the battle honours of the first light horse were passed back to the New South Wales Lancers.
I was going to ask about the Lancer Barracks itself. Now, being the oldest military barracks in Australia, I just love the line on your website saying, built in 1820, and some of the soldiers there would have been fighting with Wellington against Napoleon. And I thought that was an amazing history for me of looking back at how old this place was, and the fact that the Australian Defence Force hasn't sold it off and has actually kept it as a working military base is amazing. I guess being out in Parramatta, they didn't decide they needed the property values.
Yep, the barracks date from 1820. Under Lachlan Macquarie, they're the oldest military barracks on the Australian mainland. Anglesey Barracks in Hobart are older. It's funny that you should ask about the desire for local developers to get their claws on it. I have spent a couple of hours this afternoon organising a visit by the Mayor, Lord Mayor of Parramatta, to Lancer Barracks on Friday, and we know what he's about.
Yeah, then again, at least it's all heritage. They can't knock it down.
Well, they can't knock it down, but it's what they can do to it.
Now, just to get onto the tank side of things, I love that the regiment got Matildas in Matilda 2s in 1956. When you think that the rest of the world has moved on from having deploying Matildas, they said, right, we're going to take these ones and keep going with them. And when everybody else, I guess they were looking at getting the Centurions, which what was the go there?
Right. Well, what happened was that the regiment had Matildas during World War II.
Did they? Okay, sorry. I just saw that maybe they got rid of them in 56.
That's right. In 1956, the regiment.
John's back.
Yeah. The Matildas had basically ceased to be an effective vehicle. And even an effective training vehicle. Initially, they got staghounds to replace the Matildas, and gradually, within the next couple of years, by 1960, the regiment, the training regime for Matildas was for the Centurions was in place, whereby they had four home trainer Centurions in the barracks. But all the camps were done down in Puckapunyal, and as were the most of the courses. And there was a squadron of tanks available in Puckapunyal for the two reserve tank regiments at the time, and that was 1st 15th and 8th 13th. And they would go by train down to Puckapunyal, do their full camp at Puckapunyal, and then return. The 4 tanks were used as training at Lancer Barracks, and also out at Holsworthy, where they were used for troop level exercising on weekends. In addition, as the Vietnam War progressed, that's where the infantry battalions, the Australian infantry battalions that were going to Vietnam, were exposed to tanks. They were the 1st 15th guys would go out there and do the tank familiarisation on their Centurion tanks. We have a Centurion tank that's a goer and a Matilda tank that's a goer.
I noticed there's the Matilda with the 95mm rather than
76, rather than the 34mm 2-pounder. Yeah, that's a bit sad because the turret, the hull of that vehicle of ACE was the first tank ashore at Balikpapan in the 1st of July 1945, but we could not find its turret. We found the tank down in Moss Vale. It was down in a gully and covered with all sorts of things.
Where was the place in South Australia, John?
Sorry,
Murrayville.
Murrayville. The tank yard at Murrayville. You might have to wander around there at some stage and see what could be found.
Yeah, well, we tried everywhere to get its turret or a turret that took the anti-tank gun, but we couldn't find one. And we had on a previous static exhibit that we had one of the howitzer tank turrets, and that's the turret we've got on. We've refurbed the turret. It's now got its Travis gear and everything. So it's the tank itself is fully operational except for the gunnery, and the gunnery being the howitzer, and also the Bisa machine gun, the one that fires the German ammunition, of course, and that's a wooden replica, and we have a replica Bisa along with some expended 7.92 millimeter German ammunition on exhibit in the museum.
Yeah, we're going to have fun about talking about the Bisas and why they chose them, and saying, "Oh yes, we'll be able to get lots of ammunition once we're defeating the enemy."
Well, basically, no. The reason with the Bisa was that they had the Czech design. They took it back to the UK, and they tried to chamber it for the 303. And of course, the trouble with the 303 is it is a rim cartridge, and so therefore will not take a disintegrating link bill. And what they did with the Vickers was that they had a mechanism where the round was withdrawn from a cloth belt and then chambered. And that they couldn't design that into the Bisa. And that's why they decided to run with the Bisa as it was. And the interesting thing is, yes, the war did go the right way for them. And yes, the stockpiles they had at the start of the war, they were able to.
Unfortunately for the poor fellas in the tanks, that the German ammunition didn't. They had to their links didn't work or something like that, and so they actually had to load all the links in themselves or something. I remember reading that it was an annoying process, but this gave the bow gunners something to do.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting, because that's not one that I've heard from the guys, and I'll try and raise it with our remaining veteran. We've got one remaining veteran, a guy called Bert Castellari, and he's based in Canberra. Still very bright. He was a guy who was a youngster. He was a cub reporter before the war. Went as a war correspondent after being a trooper in the Lancers. He was the CO's commanding officer's loader during the New Guinea and the Borneo campaigns that the regiment was in. And he went as a war correspondent to the Korean War. And back in Australia, he joined the press gallery in Canberra, and he was the press secretary to a couple of Bob Hawke's ministers. So quite an interesting story. He's still alive. He is still highly articulate in those periods where he is articulate.
So, and the Lancers nowadays who've been they've been given Bushmasters.
We have Bushmasters, and we are getting at the moment. We've got Bushmasters and G-Wagons, but we're the regiment will be fitted out completely with the Bushmasters, only an interim vehicle at the moment. It is the Hawkeye that is to be the regiment's vehicle, and the regiment is doing its conversion at the moment.
So Hawkeye being the 4x4 light utility vehicles.
Yeah, and it's the big advantage with the Hawkeye is the gun platform on the back, and the results that the 10th Light Horse, which is already equipped with the Hawkeye, have been achieving in their targeting with the weaponry that is placed on the back of the vehicle is quite amazing. So the regiment is very much looking forward to that. It makes it a real light armoured reconnaissance regiment, as opposed to something that's using an interim vehicle like the Bushmaster.
Yeah, an interim mobility vehicle. Yeah. With the museum and your open days, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have we've got 3 Ferret Scout cars that are operational. We've got the Matilda, which is operational. We have a Centurion, which is operational, although at the moment the Cents, we've just replaced the clutch plate in the Cent, which was quite a job. You had to have a crane pull the whole engine out, then pull the gearbox out, then replace the clutch plate, and then put it all back in. It's also operational. On the open days, we within Lancer Barracks, because these are not vehicles we can take outside or take outside anymore. We were allowed to until a few years ago, but RMS have got worried about their roads. And also we used to drive it down Macquarie Street, and now Macquarie Street now has a tram line running down the centre of it. And I think people might be a bit concerned about what we might do to this highly expensive tram line. We run them backwards and forwards within Lancer Barracks. We also have a short wheelbase Land Rover with the 106mm RCL mounted, and we're able to give the youngsters who are interested a ride in that and an old Austin Champ that we've got, so the kids get to actually go in something that moves, and we've also got a full troop of Ferret Scout cars that we can run, and depending on the day, depending on where we've got to with our vehicles, we run them. At the moment,
Brenda the Universal Carrier.
What?
Brenda the Universal Carrier. She still going?
Oh yeah, she goes. Yeah, we run her occasionally. Yeah.
That's supposed to be street legal.
Oh, well, the trouble with any of the older tracked vehicles, whilst Brenda does have heritage registration and can be taken on the road, we're very careful about the older tracked vehicles, which of course chew up the roads. And we're lucky within Lancer Barracks, we have some very hard concrete hard standing that's been put down by the Army for us, and we're able to do limited damage. We have to watch out. We allow parking on site for visitors, and we warn them very much about where not to park when we're running the Matilda. We haven't had anyone hit yet. But no, they work out, and the last Sunday of each month. We're open every Sunday, but it's on the last Sunday of each month that is run, and it's usually a very popular day. We get a lot of people coming.
I mean, it's a beautiful old building surrounded by skyscrapers in Parramatta.
Oh,
I've only seen pictures, but it looks amazing. But I understand that the building actually got relocated in the 50s.
The museum building in the 60s, in 1963, 64. Yep. But that's an 1828 building. It was down 130 Macquarie Street, opposite or where Parramatta RSL now is. It was made available by the AMP Society, who owned it. They set up all the stones and
shipped it down brick by brick in the same order and rebuilt it.
Yeah, they were numbered, and all the stones are in the right place. But internally, and the fan light, which is a window at the top of the door, that's original. Everything else is replica. And that's one of the difficulties.
Beautiful sandstone building that in the middle of Parramatta there, yeah.
If you pull something down and you move it, a lot's going to wind up being replica. It's an amazing building, actually. You can go in there, like last Sunday, it was about 40 degrees in Parramatta. We still got a few through, but a few actually braved the heat to come out. But you go into the building itself, and it's really quite cool because of the sandstone.
And the bronze horseman out the front, which is the smallest size version of the one that's here on Anzac Parade in Canberra. I pass it pretty much every day going to work.
Well, what the story there is that John Howells, who was the chair of the committee that put that memorial on Anzac Parade in Canberra, and that was a public raising of $4 million. The last $500,000 was actually contributed by the government, and that's because we were so close. That horse is the prototype horse. Louis Lyman, the sculptor, presented that to the committee to show what the horses would look like. And it's basically replicated in the lead horse and lead horse in the memorial. But that was presented to the committee that was raising the funds and approving the designs for the the memorial. And John Howells, he actually paid $80,000 out of his own money to buy that for us. He'd been commissioned in First 15th Lancers back in the 1950s, and then spent a career in the regular army. He gave us that horse, and so that's it's a half size of the 1.5 size that's in the memorial in Canberra. Yeah.
Nice one. Well, John, thank you so much for your time and that fascinating bit of history.
I only got halfway through the history, but then again, you were stupid enough to ask me the history.
Sure.
We can always get you back.
The important thing is that for anyone in Sydney, the last Sunday of the month, Lancer Barracks in Parramatta, just Google New South Wales Lancers, all your information comes up, and there will be running tanks, which is a rare thing for so many people to actually see and hear them running, and you don't really understand what they are until you see that. That's right. Yeah, that's right. And you don't have to, there is pre-book on the website, but you don't have to pre-book. You just front up with your credit card. Most people front with a credit card, and we'll take your money and let you in. How much is admission? The admission is just went up, $20 for an adult, but $20 for an adult, $15 for a child or senior. But we have a family entry of family of 4 gets in for $30, and any additional family member is $5. So that's a good deal to see a running tank. Great. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Rob. You any other questions? No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it.